I want to thank you all for being here and for your continued support for the U.S.-Ukraine relationship. And really thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. I would like to take a moment at the outset really to shine a spotlight on the urgent humanitarian situation in Ukraine. I think the recent order by the so-called authorities of Luhansk to expel the UN and humanitarian organizations doing important work in the area is a callous step inconsistent with the Minsk agreements. Expelling humanitarian organization puts up to 3 million people at risk in the Donbas by denying access to food, to medicine, shelter, and clothes in advance of winter. Indeed, 16,000 tons of immediate life-saving humanitarian assistance is now being blocked from reaching those in need. This conflict represents the most significant challenge to European security since the end of the Cold War. The key to resolving this crisis is simple. It's the full implementation of Minsk. The Ukrainian government has diligently implemented its responsibilities under Minsk, while the Russian government and its proxies in Ukraine have not. One of the most egregious examples of Russia and its separatist proxies' unwillingness to honor their Minsk obligation is in fact this expulsion of UN and humanitarian organizations from Luhansk. The fastest way to end the casualties and end the humanitarian crisis is the full implementation of the Minsk commitments, including a full ceasefire, the withdrawal of heavy weapons, and unimpeded access by international humanitarian organizations. As the U.S. Department of State's Assistance Coordinator for Europe and Eurasia, I proudly oversee the State Department's funding for Ukraine. And I would like to speak now about the commendable progress Ukraine is making on its other difficult challenge, and that's the path to reform. In my position, I've seen many countries struggle to implement their reform agendas. It's not easy, and it takes an all-hands-on-deck effort. For Ukraine, this means government leaders, civil society, and the Ukrainian people working together to deliver on the promise of the Maidan and to do what previous governments were unable or unwilling to do, bringing justice, clean government, and human dignity to Ukraine. Ukraine, however, is fighting for its future both on the battlefields of the Donbas and in Kyiv city center. Ukrainians are fighting to build a democracy that is closer to its people, an economy where what you know matters more than whom you know, and a society that functions under the rule of law, free from cancer of corruption. Yet Ukraine is doing this under the continual threat of Russia's disregard for international norms and its use of hybrid tactics to undermine Ukrainian sovereignty and territorial integrity. At the same time, the Russian propaganda machine is working overtime, not only in Ukraine and Russia, but around the world, telling lies about what the Maidan was and what the government of Ukraine has achieved so far and aims to do in the future. Yet, Ukraine keeps moving forward. And as a testament to its 1,000-year history of resiliency and resolve, Ukraine is demonstrating a level of commitment and progress that is rare, even in countries that are not suffering from external aggression and attempted annexation. Ukraine has proven that violence and decades of corruption and missed opportunities can't squelch the spirit and the resilience of people who demand more from their officials. And in fact, I saw this resilience and resolve firsthand when I made my very first trip to Ukraine shortly after I took this job. I was really impressed with the commitment and energy of the new leaders in the government, many of whom you heard from today, to take on reforms. And also I was impressed with the diligent work of civil society and the independent journalists tracking the reforms and engaging with Ukraine's government and people to chart a new democratic path. But I think the reforms speak for themselves, and I want to go through a few of them. On anti-corruption, the Ukrainian government has started down a path to decentralized power. It's created new structures like the National Anti-Corruption Bureau and stood up new patrol police forces in Kyiv and Odessa to truly serve and protect the people. And I would add, for those of you who are watching what the United States is doing, these police were trained by American law enforcement officers, in some cases from California and other places. And the first class actually graduated last July on July 4th. So we were very proud of that. The other anti-corruption reforms also highlight that the RADA passed public disclosure laws. And as public procurement procedures are being overhauled, e-procurement practices are replacing them and helping them to increase transparency. On judicial reforms, the RADA also voted to lift the immunity of judges and members of parliament and adopted legislation to reduce staff and establish a roadmap for the creation of the local prosecutor offices and the fair selection of local prosecutors. And as a result of the US, EU, and UK contributions, current and new prosecutors will also participate in training programs. They'll receive increased salaries and become subject to a periodic performance evaluation. And finally, to highlight a few economic reforms, Ukraine has made the difficult but necessary choice to begin reforming its pension plan and passed a strict budget that meets IMF requirements. The country has worked to cut wasteful gas subsidies and is closing the space for corrupt middlemen to take advantage of the Ukrainian people. And the government has streamlined business registration procedures and removed duplicative permitting and licensing requirements in an attempt to improve the business climate and boost investor confidence. And I hope many of you who are doing business there have noticed that. These efforts and more are beginning to bear fruit. Ukraine has not one, but two free, fair elections, and it is preparing for a local election on October 24th, and we hope the vote will meet the same high standards. In the first 6 months of 2015, Ukraine increased agricultural exports to key countries, with exports to the United States rising by 36%, to Asia by 10%, and to the EU countries by 6%. And just last month, Ukraine was able to reach agreement in principle on a substantial debt relief deal with its creditors, which will unlock billions in emergency financing. But throughout this difficult yet hopeful period, the United States message has been clear and unequivocal. We stand with the people of Ukraine in their search for justice, human dignity, security, defense of their territorial integrity and sovereignty, and a return to economic health, and for the European future they've chosen and deserve. That's why we've provided Ukraine with over $244 million in security assistance and supplies to help Ukrainians live in peace and defend their population when needlessly attacked. And that's why we will support those Ukrainians suffering as a result of Russia's aggression. Already, 2.4 million Ukrainians have been displaced. So far, we have provided over $61 million to help international organizations and NGOs meet the basic humanitarian needs of conflict victims and internally displaced persons. Unfortunately, though, the needs far outpace funding, and humanitarian appeals remain woefully underfunded. The diaspora community plays a key role in raising the awareness and responding to the humanitarian needs, and we urge the continued involvement of your community in the humanitarian response. In total, the United States has provided over $516 million in assistance since the start of the crisis, in addition to two $1 billion loan guarantees. With continued progress on economic reforms and as conditions warrant, we will be willing to work with Congress to consider providing a third loan guarantee of up to another $1 billion. We also intend to build on our assistance in the coming months and years. We know that the needs are really great, and will stand with Ukraine for the long term. Assistance, however, is not the only part of the solution. The situation in Ukraine demands a multifaceted approach that incorporates investment and diplomacy. The sanctions that we jointly are imposing with the Europeans must continue until Russia complies with its obligations under the Minsk agreements, including the return of hostages like Nadia Shevchenko, and returns all of the Ukrainian territory to Ukraine. And we thank the congressmen and congressmen who work today, who work day and night to help us execute this approach, and who use their influence to highlight the continual need to do more and more for Ukraine. The support of our global partners, particularly in Europe, is also integral to helping Ukraine grow strong, more resolved, and better equipped against future challenges. Yet I think none of what we achieved would be possible without the enduring support of the Ukrainian diaspora community, who help us all stay informed, stay prepared, and stay focused on the future of Ukraine, both in Washington and in Kyiv. So we thank you all for what you do to support our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. And keep up the good work, please. Together, we continue to work towards realizing our aspiration for Europe, whole, free, and at peace, which can only be completed once Ukraine is whole, free, prosperous, and at peace. Ukraine is pursuing a path that will not only solidify its European future, but will help motivate all those living under oppression and fighting for a prosperous, democratic, and independent life without the constant threat of bribery, coercion, and intimidation. That's what we have to continue to build together. We welcome your partnership, look forward to it, and thank you all very much.
An emphasis on getting food, medical aid,